Canada is a world leader when it comes to critical minerals, and America wants in. Washington has just bought stakes in two BC-based critical mineral companies, sending their stocks soaring. The U.S. bought a 10% stake of Trilogy Metals for $35.6 million and a 5% stake in Vancouver-based Lithium Americas.
When Washington announced it had bought stakes in two Canadian mining companies, it sent shockwaves through both economies. The U.S. government, known for its tariff wars and trade confrontations, had quietly stepped into the role of investor. It purchased 10% of Trilogy Metals for $35.6 million and 5% of Lithium Americas, both based in British Columbia. For the White House, it looked like a masterstroke, a move to secure control over resources critical to America's future. But for Canada, it marked a subtle yet historic shift. The world's largest economy had just bought into its northern neighbor's ground, and in doing so, handed Ottawa an unexpected advantage. After years of trade friction, steel, aluminum, lumber, and auto tariffs, the balance had shifted. The country once on the receiving end of American pressure suddenly held something the U.S. couldn't easily replace: control over key materials at the heart of modern industry. This investment was not a random gesture. It reflected a new philosophy within Trump's second term, a shift from confrontation to ownership. Instead of taxing competitors, Washington began buying into industries it deemed vital for national security. Critical minerals became the centerpiece of that approach. Officials said the goal was clear: reduce dependence on China, which still dominates global lithium-ion battery production. The U.S. Geological Survey noted that America's lithium supply has long relied on imports from Chile and Argentina. For the administration, investing in Canadian firms offered a faster way to rebuild independence and secure cleaner supply chains across North America. But this new play blurred the lines between free enterprise and state control. By taking equity positions, the U.S. government no longer acted as a neutral regulator. It had become a participant in the market. Previous cases of government equity, such as the investment in a Nevada-based rare earth company, had already doubled in value, strengthening the idea that public money could yield private-style returns. Yet beneath the optimism lay a paradox. The plan meant that America First now depended on Canadian minerals, Canadian laws, and Canadian oversight. The United States had entered its neighbor's industrial landscape not as a dominant power, but as a shareholder bound by another country's rules. In Ottawa, the reaction was calm but confident. Canada had long treated its resource sector as a matter of sovereignty. In recent years, it blocked several foreign takeovers, especially from China, arguing that national security must come before profit. But the American investment was different. It gave Canada both financial inflow and political leverage. Even with Washington holding small stakes, the projects remained fully governed by Canadian law. The deposits, the permits, and the refining facilities are all under Ottawa's authority. That means any operational or environmental decision must pass through Canadian channels first. Beyond ownership, Canada controls something more valuable: refining capacity. Its plants in British Columbia process zinc and germanium, essential ingredients for semiconductors, batteries, and defense systems. After China restricted exports of germanium in 2023, those refineries became irreplaceable. American companies now depend on Canadian plants to turn raw ore into usable materials, a dependence no executive order can override. The U.S. may own shares, but Canada owns the bottleneck. That quiet reality transforms the power equation. What once made Canada vulnerable to tariffs has now become its shield. The very industries Trump sought to pressure have turned into tools of leverage. The consequences of this new model extend far beyond two companies. The moment Washington entered the Canadian mining sector, investors took notice. Mining stocks surged and resource funds began flowing north. Canada's position in the global mineral supply chain strengthened overnight. Inside the U.S., the political reaction was divided. Fiscal conservatives warned that government ownership in private companies resembled managed capitalism. Economists questioned whether this approach distorted competition and blurred accountability. Others pointed out that such investments contradicted the free market principles that once defined Trump's political brand. Meanwhile, America's allies saw opportunity. As trade tensions grew, partners across Europe and the Pacific turned to Canada as a stable alternative for supply and investment. The country's combination of political stability, advanced mining standards, and growing government support made it an ideal hub for Western reindustrialization. Ironically, Trump's attempt to consolidate control over supply chains ended up strengthening Canada's global standing. The policy designed to secure American dominance had elevated its neighbor instead. Just a few years ago, a tariff announcement from Washington could send shockwaves through the Canadian economy. Today, that dynamic has changed. By taking ownership stakes in Canada's mining firms, the U.S. has tied part of its own industrial and defense future to a foreign partner. And not just any partner, but the very one it tried to pressure through tariffs and threats. For Canada, it is more than a symbolic win. It's proof that control of supply chains equals political independence. Every shipment of refined lithium and germanium crossing the border is a reminder that economic power now flows both ways. Trump's strategy was meant to restore American dominance, but it has exposed the limits of unilateral control in a globalized world. To build electric vehicles, batteries, and advanced weapons, the United States now needs Canada's minerals, Canada's infrastructure, and Canada's cooperation. That reality reverses years of imbalance. The U.S. can still wield tariffs, but it can no longer dictate the rules. By investing north of the border, Washington didn't just buy stock, it bought vulnerability. In the battle over resources, the advantage now lies with Ottawa. What began as a show of strength has become a quiet backfire, revealing that even the most powerful economy can find itself dependent on the ground it does not own. And in that silence between the mines of British Columbia and the corridors of Washington, one truth stands out. Power has quietly shifted north. This time, the upper hand belongs to Canada.
All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle, and then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. Let's see, I can tell you. I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
Trump has just made a fool of himself on the world stage. At the United Nations in New York, two very different images of leadership have emerged. On one side, President Donald Trump turned his address to the world into a spectacle that blended personal grievances with campaign slogans. He spoke about broken teleprompters, escalators that stalled, and his belief that he deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. The moment that should have showcased American vision became a reminder of how unpredictable and unfocused the White House has become. On the other side, Prime Minister Mark Carney used his own stage in New York to underline Canada's role in global trade and cooperation. He framed his country as a partner ready to fill the vacuum when others retreat. The contrast is sharp, and it tells us something important about where economic and political credibility now lies. Trump's remarks at the UN were not a roadmap for foreign policy. They were a repeat of familiar domestic talking points. He warned that countries were going to hell. He dismissed clean energy as a scam, and he exaggerated his own achievements. The substance that leaders expect from the American president was missing. Instead of building support for U.S. initiatives, he gave the impression of a leader caught in grievance politics. Behind the theatrics sits a deeper reality. Trump's reciprocal tariffs, rolled out earlier this year, were sold as a tool to reset global trade. Yet their effect has been mixed at best. The U.S. International Trade Commission noted in a September update that sectors like autos and metals have faced supply chain disruptions, while consumer groups warn of rising costs in key imports. Rather than projecting economic strength, the president's speech highlighted the gap between his promises and the economic evidence. Beyond trade, the credibility gap is widening. Federal Reserve surveys released this fall show that small manufacturers report lower new orders compared to 2024, citing tariff-driven price hikes as a major reason. Supply chains that once flowed through Japan and Korea are now stalling because negotiations remain unresolved. These are not abstract numbers. They mean delayed shipments, higher costs for U.S. consumers, and fewer investment commitments in American factories. Trump promised that tariffs would unlock a wave of new jobs and capital, but the evidence from official agencies shows strain instead of revival. While Trump wandered through tangents at the UN, Carney was busy shaping a different narrative in New York.
We have the resources the world needs. We have the talent to turn that potential into growth. We're a reliable partner.
Speaking at policy forums, he emphasized that Canada has the resources, the technology, and the alliances to thrive even in a fractured trading system. He pointed to agreements with Mexico and talks with the European Union as steps to secure markets beyond the U.S. His tone was not dramatic but deliberate. He tied Canada's energy output, critical minerals, and investment potential into a strategy meant to reassure both investors and allies. Where Trump leaned on anecdotes about construction contracts and campaign slogans, Carney leaned on the fundamentals of economic credibility. This divergence matters. In a moment when global markets look for signals, one leader projected confusion while the other projected stability. The United Nations stage has long been where American presidents outline their vision for the world. This year, the stage revealed something else. Trump's reliance on theatrics, personal stories, and exaggerated claims has turned a serious platform into an echo of domestic rallies. Instead of reinforcing the case for his tariff strategy, his words exposed its weakness. They showed a leader searching for validation while allies and rivals alike questioned the direction of U.S. policy. Carney, by contrast, used the same setting to advance a coherent message about trade and partnership. His approach did not make headlines for odd tangents or technical mishaps. It made headlines because it was steady and forward-looking. For Canadians, it was a chance to show that they can carry responsibility on the global stage. For Americans, it was a reminder that when theater replaces strategy, credibility is the first casualty.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump is threatening to impose a 100% tariff on all movies made outside of the United States. In an early morning post, Trump lashed out at other countries for stealing, quote, candy from a baby.
The announcement came early in the morning, and it sent ripples through both Hollywood and Canada. President Donald Trump declared that he would impose a 100% tariff on every film made outside the United States. For decades, tariffs have been tools used against steel, cars, or electronics. Now, for the first time, the heart of American culture is pulled into the fight. A movie today is not a car shipped across a border. It is a digital service, an international collaboration, and a product that relies on talent worldwide. That is why the threat immediately raised alarms. Instead of strengthening American film, it risks shaking the foundations of an industry built on global reach.
Is the largest and most powerful film and television industry on the planet Earth. And it got that way by exporting its product. 80% of its revenues come from outside the United States. You know, White Lotus, that a lot of people enjoy, is an entirely American show, conceived in America, produced in America, owned by America, you know, and happens to be shot in spectacular locations around the world. It defies logic entirely that that kind of a show would attract some kind of tariff.
The United States has built the most powerful film and television sector in the world. More than 80% of its revenues come from exports to audiences outside America. Hollywood became dominant precisely because it could tell stories that traveled across borders. Now, the tariff threat puts that at risk. Productions rarely stay within U.S. borders. Ice road truckers had to film in Canada because the ice roads are there. White Lotus, an American show, was shot abroad even though it was fully conceived and owned in the U.S. Beyond filming sites, studios depend heavily on outsourcing. Visual effects and post-production often go to Canada, India, Vietnam, or South Korea, where costs are lower and expertise is deep. If projects using those services are branded as foreign-made, Hollywood itself will suffer. Costs rise, projects stall, and thousands of technical jobs could be disrupted. Even before a single tariff is collected, the chill is real. Energy is wasted on legal and financial calculations instead of storytelling. A measure presented as job protection risks undermining the very workforce it claims to defend.
As Premier Ford just said, a lot of this is talk. This is saber rattling at its finest. Nothing's been decided. And rather than speculate on worst-case scenarios, what matters is how Canada responds now, how Ontario responds.
Across the border, Canadian leaders and unions are watching closely. Canada's screen industry is a vital part of the economy. National figures show more than 12 billion Canadian dollars in annual production in 2022 and 2023, with roughly $4.8 billion directly sourced from American projects. Ontario alone records a $3 billion industry. The threat from Washington is serious, but Canadian voices emphasize resilience. Stable tax credits, training, and infrastructure are seen as the keys to keeping Hollywood North attractive. Provinces like Ontario and British Columbia have long used incentives to bring in American productions, and those policies remain intact. At the same time, Canada is not cornered. The industry has strong ties to Europe, the United Kingdom, and global streaming platforms. Canadian performers and crews can still reach international audiences even if U.S. projects slow. Rather than panic, the message from Canada is to double down on domestic strength while continuing to welcome global partners. Not too slow. What emerges is a sharp contrast. In the United States, uncertainty spreads through the largest creative export sector, which depends on global sales for more than 4/5 of its revenue. Any retaliatory duties from Europe or Asia would cut directly into those profits. In Canada, by contrast, governments and unions are preparing to adapt. If American studios hesitate, Canadian producers can step forward, supported by provincial policies and international partnerships. Rather than crippling Canada, the tariff talk may highlight the advantages of filming there. The outcome is striking. A policy aimed at punishing foreign production threatens to wound Hollywood itself, while Canada steadies its own industry and looks outward. What was intended as a show of strength risks becoming another example of how Trump's tariffs backfire, leaving America weaker while its neighbor holds firm.